for another match in the Crazy House World Championship Candidates tournament. We only have a few matches remaining, and today we are watching blitzbullet versus VariantsOnly. The players are seated and ready to go. blitzbullet playing white against VariantsOnly. And we will follow this match, 10-game match, from the view of blitzbullet. And blitzbullet has a very one-sided opening repertoire as white. He usually plays the kingside fianchetto, but VariantsOnly is playing some sort of hedgehog setup, inviting blitzbullet to put both his center pawns on e4 and d4. And blitzbullet is an aggressive player, so he goes for it, placing all his pieces in the most aggressive spots. And welcome those of you who are watching. Do we have any predictions? I should mention that even though h4 is aggressive, it does weaken, for instance, the g4 square. So g4 is an excellent spot for the knight, putting pressure on this e5 pawn. And keeping the pawns side by side controls a lot of squares on the fourth rank. I wonder if black was considering taking on e3 in between. It sure was an option. And even here you might consider taking on f2 and then just threatening the knight on f3. And indeed, VariantsOnly goes for it. Because the d4 pawn is weak, and if you can get two pawns for a piece, it's more or less an equal trade. And here you're disturbing the white king, who's been lowered to the second rank. And white will have some problems for the coming moves with his king. And still no apparent weaknesses in the black camp. Seems like white's aggressive setup has backfired somewhat. He's trying to stabilize the situation here, securing the d4 pawn. White has a slight space advantage he could try to make use of. So this bishop in a strong position, threatening the h4 pawn and also threatening to take maybe on d4. Hard for white to keep up here with all the threats. g2 is certainly not an ideal spot for the knight. And I suspect that black will take on d4 with something. Well, he decided to take with a knight. And this diagonal seems very powerful for black. It was probably a wise decision not to open up the diagonal more than necessary. VariantsOnly just playing some natural moves here. Good afternoon, gingerbread man. So black has netted 2 pawns here. And opening up a weak square here on c3. If black can get rid of this knight, there's an opportunity to fork on c3, so it immediately threatens the knight on e4. Black seems to be completely in control here. I was a bit surprised he decided to take on c4 rather than e4 actually. Yes, and VariantsOnly was actually putting some pressure in several games against Katask. That was impressive indeed. So is white managing to put some pressure on black here? Look out for the knight check on c3. Black might seem a bit weak here, but notice this bishop doing a tremendous job. So this will put an end to this game, I think, because if the queen takes, knight d2 check, forking the king and the queen, and yeah, nothing to do there. And now we have this little bug. I'm just curious about one little position here. It was when... Oh, this is not the game. This is the game. So, in this position, yeah, the computer also likes to take on e4 rather than taking on c4. Taking on e4 makes much more sense. Oh well, black was doing so well anyway. And we see blitzbullet playing a similar setup. A very passive, I should say a very flexible setup with black. Fianchetoing his queenside bishop, but also putting pressure on the dark squares. Once again, he pushes the h-pawn. Aggressive, but also a bit double-edged. One move you could try here is to take on d4, because if white takes, you can take on e5. But black decides to go for d5 instead, which I think is a bit odd because this bishop is trapped behind this pawn. So white should probably just try to figure out how to play around this island in the center, which is rather blocked. So VariantsOnly going on the attack, giving some material to trade a lot of stuff, bringing the black king all the way to the 4th rank. How do you capitalize on this? So this is a nice idea, just cutting off the black king. The black king won't be going back anytime soon. I think black should put his queen here just to maybe invite a queen trade, bringing the black king back one step. Because if you put something else there, black is in immediate danger of getting mated. But was it even possible to put the queen on f6? I'm thinking maybe knight h4 check then, and the king needs to go to the e file, up to e4 even. No, that was probably lost anyway. Yes, it was. You can just trade and play queen d3 mate then. So a very nice move, very instructive. Put the queen here, just cut off the king, and white is threatening to mate here on h4 because this bishop is pinned. You mean in this position? I'm not sure. Usually it's very good just to restrict the opponent's king, because with every piece the defender puts on the board, the king sort of tends to get more and more entangled, and less space to move around. But knight h4 was certainly a possibility. The white king would have to go to either e5 or e4. Wow, so knight h4 check, king g4. Can the black king find a safe spot? It seems very, very improbable. The queen moving back to cut off the white king even more, and just zigzagging up the board, and pawn g3 is coming. Very impressive games here by VariantsOnly. So we see the same type of setup here as in the first game, where clearly something went really bad for blitzbullet. Black is choosing another setup here. He didn't play e6. In that game he played h6, e6 with a more flexible setup. Castling this early gives a much more clear target. So even if castling long is a bit loose, white can probably afford it because he has such great control. Oh, that's this bug again. I was just about to say, why not simply give the queen and check here and do the discovered check. So much compensation for white here. You could just play bishop f5, picking up tons and tons of material for the queen, and this looks like it's over. Yeah, the pin on the h5 will guarantee that white gets a lot of material for the queen. The question here is, do you move the king or do you interpose with a knight? Black is looking to open the diagonal here to create some threats, but white has all the time in the world to pick up the piece here. Maybe do discovered check, bring the bishop over to the queen side to secure it. Hi there, Warman starts now. This bishop is in a bad spot here, and after this bishop goes, d4 will be hanging. I was surprised that VariantsOnly varied his opening in this game, because he was doing so well in the first game. So, do you go up or do you give the knight for this? Yeah, going up looks like black doesn't have enough to create any serious threats here. White just needs to shield his king a little bit. For instance, pawn a4 check, you can just take with the king and you look safe. And meanwhile you have mating threats here. And black is probably about to resign. Yeah, black resigned. And that's a very curious bug. So I think it has to do with the number of spectators somehow. Someone mentioned it. And what's this? This is another opening. This is actually something I play myself. And I wonder what to do here. Actually, might consider taking on c3 while the king is still on e1, because then white is forced to take with this pawn rather than allowing the queen trade. I don't like the side of this. This seems very, very passive. Very passive indeed. Giving white plenty of opportunities to do whatever he likes. This was slow, this was passive. You show your hand too early. I don't like it at all. Even though I'm not sure if white chose the right response. Because now black is actually putting some pressure here on the white position. Especially d4 is weak. If you take here, you have a knight check. You can trade on e3 and disrupt the white coordination. And now I prefer black, definitely. White is doing a good job though, keeping his position together. And if he can bring his king to the corner and just bring some order in the position, bring the rook along, he should be doing just fine. One idea might be to take on d4, because, yeah, if the pawn takes, you have knight f4 check. Now, white's king seems a little naked. And black is trying to just open the position as much as he can. Black might be interested in a queen trade, and maybe white cannot allow it. Notice the pin here on the f pawn, which might be useful for black. So now the g file got blocked, and black can safely take on g6 without worrying about rook takes g6. There's still a lot of compensation here on the black squares thanks to the piece sacrifice on d4. White cannot take on d4 because bishop takes g3 and the queen is hanging on d4. And here black could just go for the queen sack, I think. Yeah, so much compensation on the dark squares and tremendous pressure here. You can just pile up on this rook. Also there, the knight here is a sitting duck. Not so clear how this pawn sacrifice helped white. And I wouldn't want to be in white's shoes here. Black seems ultra safe, and it's very hard to find a defense keeping the white position alive. White simply has too few pieces to conjure some attack. Actually, I don't see any pieces helping white here. Even with an infinite number, is there a mate? Well, I suppose if you had an infinite number, you could go for maybe knight takes g6 and stuff. But okay, so you can take with check here. So this is white's idea. Black spends the tempo just securing the g6 pawn. And taking a g6, taking would allow knight f4. So maybe you just secure the bishop here, or he went for the queen. Well, look at the white king, it's just too naked. And mate is coming. So this is probably a better check in practical play than putting the bishop here, because if you run out of ideas, you can always pick up the knight on e7. Nice little trick. If white takes, you have rook g3 mate. So, what a great comeback there by blitzbullet, making it 2-2. 2-2. 2-all. And they are both playing a kingside fianchetto, and VariantsOnly just mimicking the white moves. And that is double-edged idea, because if you keep doing what your opponent does, your opponent, when he delivers mate, you're one move too late to deliver mate yourself. But as former world chess champion Mikhail Tal once said, he said something like, doing what your opponent does is usually good, because as long as they are doing good things, good moves, strong moves, playing strong moves, you can just copy them, and as soon as they make a bad move, you just deviate. So that's an interesting thought. So overprotecting the G7 square here, and also threatening G5. White doesn't have anything in hand here, and if it doesn't find anything here, I think the white position looks shaky here with the pawns. Black might even try to simply take here and take on h6. Instead he plays an aggressive move, putting pressure here on the g3 pawn. So, who has the weakest king here? Very hard to tell. White gets a pawn for the g7 square and also weakens the dark squares a bit further by sacrificing a piece here on e7. And as a matter of fact, it looks like a great idea. This knight is covering h2, so you could even, let's say, queen takes here. Oh, do you really want to allow the queen trade here? Do you really? White is just one diag away from mating here. Queen here, rook takes, pawn takes. And pawn here. Oh, sorry, the knight can take. Black is so close to getting mated. What about knight f8 check? White keeps the checks going. And I'm not sure it was such a great idea actually. Black found the right moves. He couldn't take with the knight because of queen g7 checkmate, but this seems to keep everything safe, doesn't it? Well, you need to take on g7 here, obviously. And if you take with the knight, the pawn takes, bishop takes, and then you have stuff like knight f6 check. Ooh, this is looking dangerous now. That's a great find for white. And taking with the bishop doesn't seem so great, but maybe it was necessary to take with the bishop, because what do you do about knight f6 check here? I just don't see it. Threatening stuff like knight g5 check, and of course knight g7 mate. putting the bishop on g7 in the next move seems like a good idea here for white. Oh, it just trades queens. But this is... what happens here? Black has so much material. White found all the right moves, and h1 is now a safe square, and queen h8 is mate. That was a very, very sharp finish, and in this position I was thinking maybe you could take here on g5. But that doesn't seem good. Oh, e5 is hanging, sorry. But bishop e4 is recommended. So this is very good for white. Especially after rook g7. But did black miss something here? Yeah, I was surprised white didn't check on h6. Knight g5 is mate. And here black is actually better all of a sudden. Simply take on g7. Okay. White found all the right moves. And let's get back to the match. What do we see here? We have the same type of... they keep varying their openings a little bit. Black is offering a piece. White declines. And I like this move, putting pressure on white. I think black has already equalized here. I think white did a mistake here in the opening. VariantsOnly going forward. And I mean, you could check here, maybe take on e6, try to bring the black king out even further, but finally that extra material will tell, I think. So putting pressure on the queen and protecting f5 simultaneously. White getting a knight for c5, but now it seems safe to put the king on f8. Watch out for knight at f3 check, followed by queen h2 mate. You don't have time for bishop at g5. And as a matter of fact, it's very hard to find a defense here for black. I don't see it. You might think that white is attacking, but actually it seems like black is the one who's attacking. So this covers f3 at least. But simply bishop g6. And white doesn't have enough, does he? You can simply take with the rook. And now I don't see it for white. So many threats here. Knight at f3. And black has a huge lead in material. So this covers h2, but it allows knight check here, picking up f4. But then the king would be safe for a little while. But maybe pawn f3? Is that what you do? And just pin the rook. Take here, bishop f3. No apparent threats, you can just take the rook, I think. And if king takes, you have rook h1 check. And maybe VariantsOnly thought he had rook takes g7 mate, but the rook was pinned. So we see a little tilt variation here by VariantsOnly, playing very provocatively and very badly. I don't like to see this in a World Championship Candidates tournament at all. Black already having huge problems here. This knight is likely going to e4 now, for instance, and maybe to d6. Why not pick up the bishop here? We could simply trap the queen in the middle of the board. And now queen d8 was a threat. Maybe you just take the pawn here on d5. This threatened the bishop. So I think it was a bit premature to put the queen here, actually. I would have preferred to just pick up the h5 pawn. But white has his ongoing attack. He can just pick up the bishop here, threatening the knight here. Maybe take on g8 and take on g3 with the rook. And what is black supposed to do here? Your king and pawn endgame and king and rook endgame. Well, I do like the old Auerbach books about king and pawn endgames and king and rook endgames. I know that. Let me just check my shelf. All right, we see a4 and rook a3. You have some new books also. This German endgame wizard, Carsten Müller, writes really well, I think. And obviously Dvoretsky is another great author. So what's happening here? Wow, black needed to sacrifice his queen here. That was not what he planned. I think this is actually looking okay for black. Where there is one book, I think it's called Fundamental Chess Endings by Carsten Müller, and you have Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual, something like that. White is abandoning the back rank. That's a strange decision, I think. Yeah, just cut off the queen here, retreat with the bishop, and then back rank looks weak. Very murky position. Blitzbullet has won 5 in a row, so the worst he can get out of this match is a tie. So this seems sensible, and in this crazy position, just to prevent the black king from castling. Threatening knight c2 check. And I don't think white can allow that, because if you take here and then later on take here, black looks safe on f8. So black will probably just take here, and if white takes on d7, you just go to f8. Actually, I'm not so fond of Jeremy Silman's books. He's not a very strong player. And I hate the layout of his books, which I think the layout is really subpar. So what is the idea here for black? If white takes here, you take on g2, right? King takes, and knight here, and then simply put a pawn here and queen on h1, maybe? No, it's actually mate on f1. Okay. So white needs to be careful. He protects g2. And obviously you cannot interpose with a queen because of the queen trade. But how do you protect e1 now? Is it even possible? Doesn't look so. So simply trade queens. And another queen here. And now e1 is not possible to defend anymore. So black can take this with his knight. And well, you can do this in several ways. You can maybe take on c1, yeah, that's probably the easiest way. Threatening to maybe take on e1, is that mate? So where is the forced mate? You do have another knight here that can enter the position. Maybe it's time to bring this guy to the feast. All right. 6-2 blitzbullet, who will win this match. And I'm a bit sad to see that VariantsOnly just didn't keep his cool. He was doing so great in the first two games. Okay, bye-bye. Black choosing a very aggressive setup here, quickly opening the h5. Trying to build up some pressure here on the long diagonal, but this move cuts off the bishop. Black would like to have a bishop here, or obviously a queen, but bishop here, check here, would really damage the white position. This is aiming at closing the h5, so you can take on e6 and then take on b7. There's a discovered attack here with the bishop. So this is probably a very good idea. Now that you have closed the h-file, also moves like pawn h5 is possible. But this seems simple enough, just get the bishop on b7. The rook is waiting to be captured. If white got to make a move here, maybe bishop h5 is a nice move. So black wants white to take here and then trade queens and then check on h3, but white won't allow this. Although trading queens and playing knight h3 creates some threats. This I'm a bit more skeptical about. Is black threatening anything here? So bishop g2 seems sensible, and now black wants to trade queens when he gets out of the checks, but will he? No, he won't, because white can just trade queens and mate. So that was an interesting game. I'm not sure. Pawn at h6, excellent move. But here, yeah, knight at h3 looks dangerous. And after this, white was just winning, I think. Yep. But knight h3 check. So taking on b7 was probably a mistake, like this. And then what? Pawn f3. Interesting, but I'm not sure how good this is, actually. Seems the computer isn't too sure either. And where was I? Here is the game. The last game in this match, we see a b4, and this is just someone who wants to finish this tournament. So why don't you just take here? Take on f3. Take twice. You can pick up the knight with the queen. It's a bit scary here because knight e2 would be mate. Yeah, knight e2 is mate. He didn't hear me. And after losing the first 2 games, blitzbullet won 8 in a row and takes the victory in this match. Congratulations to blitzbullet, who might be able to take 3rd place in this tournament. He needs a few more games in his last match, but that won't be easy because who is he playing in his last match? It is Candidates, I believe. Let's see in the calendar. Tomorrow, Candidates versus blitzbullet. That will be a great match, and I'm not sure that blitzbullet will get the necessary points to take the bronze medal in this Candidates tournament. He will need to play better than he did today. Thank you so much for watching, and see you again tomorrow. Bye bye.